So we're going through Hebrews. Is it all right if we get started?
Yep.
And a thought occurred to me right before we came on, and that is, I had a couple of conversations with some people earlier today, and they were concerned with passing down the faith to the next generation. And there is this tendency in humans to want to capture everything. We got to write it down and codify it. But the encounter is what's transformative. And yeah, we could have a meeting like this and we could probably record everything that happened and maybe somebody could learn a little something from it. But the fact that we're all here, the encounter can never be repeated. Yeah, we're recording it, but isn't going to happen again. And the encounter itself is transformative. And every encounter with the numinous is like an encounter with the sacred infinite, and no two encounters are the same. They never are. You can never repeat the same thing for the next generation that you exactly had. It just isn't there anymore. It's not going to happen. So when it comes to scripture, going through the process of going through it is what counts. That's what matters. That's what transforms. That's what we want to do. Some people tend to think the idea of once we go through it, we're going to write a commentary, then everybody, or a statement of faith, and everybody after us is going to know what to believe and they won't have to do this anymore. No, doing this is the point. That's where the edification comes from. And thanks to you guys, we can have distributed cognition and edification in an Ephesians 4 model. Just a little review of what we did last time for those who might be watching a video for the first time. I'm going to share my screen. Hebrews 1 CIT. And just as a little recall, we went through, let me let Ben in. We went through Hebrews 1 and we looked at the first 4 verses and we tried to come up with a central idea of the text. And what we learned is in Hebrews, some passages are easier to come up with a central idea of the text than others. And Hebrews 1 is one of those that's a little difficult because you have a main thought, but then you have a whole bunch of elaboration on that main thought for the rest of the chapter. And it's difficult to capture all that elaboration, which is what it is. It's not, I'm not saying it's not inconsequential elaboration. It's just elaboration, and it's not the main point. So some of the CITs we came up with, central idea of the text, and the idea is to come up with a 13 to 18 word sentence that captures the thought. And if it's less than 13, it's not enough information. If it's more than 18, it's not enough information. And if you can't do something within those bounds, you might be dealing with too much or too little text. Okay. So we came up with, God has spoken to us recently by his son who is cosmically exceptional. And we found out that was missing a sense of transition. Somebody pointed out we're missing a sense of time modality here and the sense of transition of speaking to the fathers versus speaking to us in a different modality. So then we reworded it a few ways. God has spoken to us recently by his son who is cosmically exceptional. God has now transitioned his mode of speaking through his son who is cosmically exceptional. And so you can see a few of these. And it's not that any one of these is wrong or any one of these is correct or incorrect. It's that we're trying to summarize and paraphrase for a variety of reasons and the main reason is to make sure you understand it. It's also a helpful tool if you want to teach or preach a passage to get to the central idea of the text, then simply reword that as a question, and that is your starting point for starting your lesson. And then the text itself will answer the question. God, who formerly spoke to the fathers by the prophets, has spoken to us recently by his cosmically exceptional son. God, who previously spoke to the fathers and the prophets. So I had formerly and previously. So there's nothing wrong with writing it a few different ways. Now, somebody commented, I think in the YouTube comments section, and they said, "What about majestically exceptional?" And the first idea that popped in my head was that the word majestically actually adds information which you don't want to do. But then I re-looked at the text And the word majesty is in here. Okay. So it's not adding to the text. It cosmically exceptional versus majestically exceptional. So that was another good stab at it. But I do want to caution us, one of the checks and balances you can put on your central idea of the text is to ask yourself, am I adding new information that is not in this text? And that can be a very tricky question because most of us are familiar with much of the rest of the Bible. And so we might be adding information that we happen to know is found somewhere else in the Bible, but we have to hone it down to what is actually found in this text. Do not supplement that with what is found in the rest of the Bible yet. You can do it later in the interpretation phase, but we're not going to do it in the observation phase or while we're trying to come up with a central idea of the text. And you might bolster that when you're getting into the pedagogical side of this. So getting to the meaning of the text is called exegesis, and that means to draw out the origin. The origin of the text is where you draw the meaning out from, okay? And relaying that to somebody else, to try to teach or talk to somebody else to help them understand the meaning of the text is called exposition. Now, if you do it in teaching, it's called pedagogy, okay? You're trying to teach something. But the two words are exegesis and exposition. So what we're doing here is a kind of a hybrid, really, where we're trying to do exegesis as a group, right? So we're not coming to a refined, finished product and then expositing that to somebody. We're just trying to do exegesis as a group. We're trying to just draw from the text the meaning that is in the text and absolutely nothing more. And our homework was to go through the rest of the chapter and look at the quotations. The rest of the chapter is essentially quotations from the Old Testament. And those quotations, and the idea was to separate the passage, like here's the Hebrews passage, and then here's the Old Testament passage that it's referring to kind of separate those out, and then we could deal with them separately like that, okay? Now, what I want to do is give you a little summary, like something to aim for. And let me share my screen again. That's really weird. Okay, there's my Bible software. I saw two things that looked like the Bible software. I want to point two things out to you. One of the main things that we identified is that God is now speaking by his Son. And I am interpreting on the fly here. But one of the main points of chapter 1 is that this Son through whom God is now speaking or has chosen to speak most recently is exceptional and comparatively better than the angels. And here's a bunch of passages why. Now, what they're getting at is very important. What they're getting at is chapter 2, verse 1, is therefore we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. That's a very important passage for this whole book. And we can talk about that in a few minutes, why that's an important passage. But as you're going through chapter 1, kind of what seems, what my boundaries are, what it looks like my boundaries are to me is like I have God speaking through his Son, and then I have, because of who the Son is, I really ought, or the audience really ought to pay heed to what the Son has to say, because something is very, very important with that. So he's establishing the credibility of the modality of speaking, and then he's using that as an impetus to say, you need to listen, you need to heed this. This is very important. And the quotations go from verse 5 through verse 14. Now I'm going to pause right here and see if anybody has anything to say. And where I kind of want to go, if any of you have delved through this and want to start dealing with the verses or show or discuss what you found or issues you found or things like that, or just have questions, whatever it is you want to say or do, I kind of want to pause and let you guys have a chance to say something or ask something or share something.
It's kind of interesting that not all the passages, like when I went back to the Old Testament passages and the quotes, I expected to see very specifically that it referred to the Son. And it seemed that not all the passages in their form refer directly to the Son.
That's
It was
exactly
obvious.
Yep, in the original context. Yep.
Yeah.
You want to talk about any of those specifically?
Yeah, 2 Samuel 7:14. The speaker's Yahweh. I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son. Speaker's Yahweh. It was to David, referring apparently to his son. And so you could extend that, I guess, to the Messiah, but he was specifically speaking to David about his direct heir to the throne.
Yeah, I'm
That's
glad you brought that up, Paul, because I came across the same issue. So this, in the context, this is David. Nathan is, or God is essentially talking to David, talking about David's son, and in the immediate context, it's Solomon. When this is restated, it even says Solomon. Now, the direct quotation usually will take you to 2 Samuel 7:14. So over here he says in Hebrews 1:5, this art my son, and I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. Well, if you look that up in the Old Testament, I will be his father, he shall be my son. That is God talking about Solomon. First Chronicles 7:13, the retelling of the same thing. I will be his father, he shall be my son. I will not take mercy away from him as I took it from him that was before thee. In other words, I'm not going to do to him what I did to Saul, King Saul. He shall build a house for my name. Solomon built a temple, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father. I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever, until you get to Jeremiah 22. That's interesting. And he said unto me, Solomon, thy son, he shall build a house in my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. Now, this specifically says Solomon. So the interesting thing is that in the context, it is definitely talking about Solomon. But the writer of Hebrews has absolutely no qualms whatsoever applying this to the Son of God, who thus far in the text is not identified yet. Something else we see in Acts 13:33. Now, this is not an Old Testament quotation, but I put it in my little chart because this has precedence in the New Testament of somebody quoting this. Well, that's Psalm 2:7. It's not the same thing. But anyway, yeah. Paul pointed out a really good point, is that in the Old Testament context, this is about Solomon. And when it shows up in the New Testament, it's about the Son of God, not about the Son of David, even though the Son of God is the Son of David. Does anybody else have anything they want to point out? If you have stuff you want to share your screen, you can do that too. Or I can just go through what I have and we can talk about that.
Anybody else see in verse 7, it seems to be saying, not interpreted, doesn't mean this, but it seems to be saying that the son character made the angels.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which immediately made me think of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. I could be misreading that, but it's if the who it's referring to in verse 7. I remember you gave that clue last week. If the who is referring to the son, then I think it's pretty clear, the son who maketh his angels spirits.
Well, that's interesting. And of the angels, he saith, who maketh his angels spirits and ministers a flame of fire. So, regardless of who the antecedent is, it seems the point seems to be that this description of angels is pretty significant. Angels are pretty cool. They're pretty significant creatures. And the son is better, because the very next verse, verse 8, but unto the son, he saith, thy throne, O God, is forever and ever a scepter. So what you're pointing out, if the who there, or if the he, if the antecedent of that is the son.
So I see it, if you look at verses 5 and 6, that's all one thought, right? Because he's saying for, and then he's got a couple in it, and then he has ands, and again,
right.
I will be to him, and again, when he bringeth, and of the angels he saith, so, or and let all the angels of God worship him. So these ands all seem to be compounding on each other. So I go back to verse 5 to figure out basically verses 5 through 7. He's saying, what angel did God ever say this to? So therefore, whoever he's saying this to is not an angel, and he's teeing up for, but in verse 8, but under the sun. So
right.
maybe I'm reading into it a little bit, but but not from other parts of the scripture, but just trying to observe what it's saying. It seems that verses 5 through 7 are saying God doesn't say these things about angels, but it's kind of setting up because he says these things about his son, which he then clarifies in 8 through 14.
Yeah.
Or whatever, 8 through 12.
Yeah. So, 1:7 seems to be about angels, and I would take the antecedent of he saith as being the God speaking from verse 1. I need to oh, Adrian's coming in. Take a hygiene moment for just a second.
Never heard it referred to.
What was that?
Nothing.
So if you ever watch my videos and you just see them cut, that's me blowing my nose.
Oh, okay.
That's what's happening.
You're trying to interpret what hygiene moment was.
Yeah. It's not to get snot on the microphone.
I took 1:7 as that's the Father talking, making the angels.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. The Father's making a comment about the angels, and then comparatively, the Son has a even better comment about him. Because they're comparing. I'm going to share my screen here. And I guess I'm going to hit a couple things that I observed and show you kind of what my thinking process is. I have like a vision for this is interesting. Like, I'm a big believer. Where'd that go? Hebrews 1, Old Testament Quotations. Can y'all see that? Okay, it didn't want to show up in my little sub window. When I'm examining passages, I have like this little visual thing that pops in my head for how it should be organized and arranged, and either on a slide or on a sheet of paper or in a chart or something like that. I'm a big believer in making charts. And the way this occurred to me, because of how it's laid out, is I'm going to have a table. And over on the left-hand side, I'm going to have the Hebrews passage. And then over on the right-hand side, I'm going to have whatever it's referring to from the Old Testament, or maybe something supplemental from the New Testament where someone else also quotes that same Old Testament passage just because I think it's kind of cool or helpful in some way. Now, for example, in verse 7, it's almost it might be exactly word for word. Yeah, well, almost word for word. in verse 7. Very clear quotation there. Some of them are not exactly word for word. And then some of them are kind of hard to find. At least they were hard to find for me. And so that's the layout here. The left-hand side is the Hebrews passage. The right-hand side is an Old Testament quotation, and then maybe some other places in the New Testament that also quote it, because I think it's helpful to capture those two, just so we see who else is using this passage this way. So we kind of get an idea that a lot of people think that this referred to the Son. All right. So in verse 1, we have, "Thou art my beloved Son, this day have I begotten thee." And that is a direct quotation from Psalm 2:7. "The Lord hath declared unto me, thou art my Son, this day have I begotten thee." Now, I don't want to get into this a whole lot here, but there is a lot of theological debate over when this happens. And there are three main views that I know of. Maybe there are more views. And the one view is when Jesus is born as a child, when Mary brings forth her firstborn son, that's when he's begotten. Another view is that he's begotten when he rises from the dead. And there's a reason people believe that. And I think it's a misunderstanding of the passage. I think the raising from the dead is proof that he's God's son, as we see in Romans 1. And then some people have this view that Christ is the eternally begotten Son, and that all of eternity is the day on which he was begotten. I think that's kind of hogwash. I lean toward the day he was born. Like, I think Christ pre-existed his incarnation. And that's very clear in Scripture. John 1, Micah 5:2, many other passages. But the begotten aspect of Christ seems to have happened when he was born. Acts 13:33 also brings this up like it's not a big deal. And then you have these, "I will be to him father, he shall be to me a son." All these are about Solomon. The writer of Hebrews seems to take no qualms making all of these about the Son of God. And then there's this Psalm 89:26-27 passage. "He shall cry to me, thou art my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. I will also make him my firstborn, higher than the kings of the earth." So there, that firstborn phrase, what you'll find, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but I tend to agree with this. What you'll find is the phrase firstborn is a title of preeminence, not necessarily just about birth order. For example, when Jacob got the birthright, he was essentially the firstborn, even though he was not the one who was born first. That kind of thing. Hebrews 1:6, "And again, when he bringeth the first begotten into the world." Now, I don't think this is an actual quotation from the Old Testament. I think this is the writer of Hebrews describing the Son of God in this way. But that whole concept of first begotten or firstborn, I just put a few other places where it shows up. But the quotation from the Old Testament is, "And let the angels of God worship him." Now, this is kind of difficult because I don't know any passage in the Old Testament that exactly says that. Right? Let the angels of God worship him. The closest thing, I think, is Psalm 97:7. It says, "Confounded be all they that serve graven images, that boast themselves of idols. Worship him, all ye gods." And that gods is Elohim, which is also used for God sometime, and it's also used for angels sometimes. So it could be translated that way. So that could be the case there. And that also brings up the question, what exactly is an angel? And then in Deuteronomy 32:43, I have down here the King James, and most of the modern versions probably also read this way. And then I have up here the Septuagint. And the Septuagint has this phrase in here, O ye nations with his people, and prevail with him, all you angels of God, for he will avenge the blood of his sons. Well, I don't see anything about the angels of God in the Masoretic in the English rendering of the Masoretic text. So that's interesting. Was he quoting the Septuagint? Or was he quoting this and wording it differently? You know, where does this come from? It's and let all the angels of God worship him. That phrase, I don't know where that is exactly like that. Do we want to pause here? Does anybody have any comments so far?
Yeah, I have a thought.
Yeah.
Some say that Jude quoted from the book of Enoch, which is not included in a lot of Bible versions today. So I'm not saying it is or is not prophecy, but or canonical, but just one thought: could the quote have come from some other literature?
So let's go to the book of Enoch. I'm sorry. Let's go to the book of Jude. Where does it say this? Where is this quotation?
The Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm looking for. I forget what verse it's in.
Maybe 7. No.
Enoch also, the 7th from Adam, prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints. All right. To execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them that are ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and all their hard speeches, which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Now I'm just going to apply a little bit of logic here. And this is an inspired text. This is telling us what Enoch prophesied. Are we told that it was written anywhere?
Not there.
Not here. Okay. So it could be that Enoch prophesied this and it gets passed down through oral tradition and all the Jews know it, but it's not necessarily written anywhere. And if it is written somewhere, it might be in some other kind of work and not something that's not called the Book of Enoch. Now, I'm not an expert on the Book of Enoch, but I have done a little bit of research, and the consensus that I come across, and I'm not me and consensus, who cares, right? But the consensus that I come across is that what you can buy at the store right now as the Book of Enoch, and I have one right behind me. I'm looking at the Book of Enoch right now. It is written after the fact and incorporated all these kind of quotations into it. And it is, if there ever was a Book of Enoch, the one you can buy at the store right now is not it. Now, I'm not saying that's definitive fact, but that's seems to be the prevailing opinion of other, more qualified people who have looked into it. And I actually wish that were not the case, because it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so I don't know.
I had another thought.
There's like the Book of Jasher gets mentioned. I have the Book of Jasher right behind me over here too.
Yep.
So this could be, so what, maybe this quotation in Hebrews 1:6 comes from something that's not in the canon, maybe?
Or it's just, it could be just divine revelation or inspiration revealed to the author. I had another comment about this day have I begotten thee.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking that we could bring some suppositions there, or presuppositions, like God is in time or God is out of time. Maybe both of those could be presuppositions. And so I was just thinking it's good to be aware of that.
Well,
I was thinking
something that's kind of interesting to me, and I'm going to go back to Genesis 1. And it's interesting to me how much stuff we talk about in scripture, you come across in scripture, really all goes back to Genesis, and not just anywhere in the book of Genesis, but right back to the beginning. So you have creation happening in Genesis, and you have this phrase, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So right away, you have days coming. You have the evening and the morning were the second day, and you have the evening and the morning were the third day. And then now you have herb yielding seed after his kind and that kind of stuff. Sun is not created yet. Okay. So if these things were epochs or eons and it happened in this order, then you would have these herbs and seeds waiting millions of years for the sun to come up. Which would be a, physical contradiction. Fourth day, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. Okay. And then he made two lights, two great lights, greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and the night. So you have let there be light in the beginning, but you don't actually have the sun and the moon until day 4. And they're given reasons to rule. The reasons that they're given is for signs, seasons, and for days and for years. And these days and their years, they're counted very specifically. Like, for example, how did they understand these things? Exodus. If you go to, say, like Exodus 20, verse 6, when he's giving you Sabbath, what am I looking for? For in 6 days, after he gives us the Sabbath, over on the bottom right-hand side of the visual aid, he's telling you, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. And then when he's explaining this, he says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord hath blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Well, these are 6 regular days, like the same kind of days that we have as days of the week here. And he's taking that out of the concept of Genesis 1. And then also we have years, and we're starting to be told, we're told day 1, day 2, day 3, and then we're told Adam had sons and daughters and lived till he was 830. So they start counting years right away. And I guess what I'm trying to say is this. I think that right in the beginning of the book, it starts to set the tone and the precedence for what, like, here's the terminology that I'm going to use with you. I'm going to talk in terms of time. And when I do so, I'm talking in terms of seasons, days, and years. And here's how I'm going to measure them. So when days happen in the future, now there are times when the word day is used figuratively and it refers to more than one 24-hour day. But this seems to be the precedent set. Let me give you another example of one of these that happens in Genesis 1. In other words, in Genesis 1, for example, this is on a different issue other than the concept of the day, is the concept of male and female. Some people think the Bible is a sexist book, and the reason they think that is because they have not read chapter 1. Okay. And I know I'm being kind of facetious when I say that. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion, them, plural, have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over the cattle and over every So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. So in the tone of the book, at the very first chapter, when the word man is used, it is a reference to both male and female, not just the male. So for the rest of the book, when you see that word man, you would have to ask the context. Is this just males, or is it males and females, or could it be just females? Everybody follow me what I'm saying? How you got to go back to the beginning to let it set the tone for how it uses the terminology that it employs. And so when the Bible talks about men and man, if we're familiar with chapter 1 of the very first book, we know that that's like it's an all-inclusive term. It's not exclusive to males. It's talking about males and females. That's another one of those issues. Anyway, so when he says, "This day have I begotten thee," I tend to think that it's an actual day, because he trains us in, he kind of programs us in chapter 1 of the first book. When I talk about days, this is what I'm talking about. That's my thoughts, and I know I'm jumping a lot of interpretive process to share that, but anyway, I just want to say that. Joe, you were in the middle of a thought, I think.
Well, the thing about time, there was, I believe it was Augustine who said, because God's outside of time, that that when God spoke in Genesis, God did not really speak, even though it says he did. It was an angel, and that the reason for that was that God never changes, and the reason for that, God is outside of time, and change is defined as different at one point in time than at another point in time.
Right.
But anyway, that was the thinking. I believe it was Augustine. So God cannot change because he's outside of time. And there's a Liberty University professor, I believe a theology professor, but he wrote a book called God, Time, and the Incarnation, which was about, is God in, time, or out? And his name is Richard Holland. But I know that some say he's in time, some say God's out of time, and I'm thinking that probably both could be presuppositions, because you have arguments. Anyway, that's all the point I'm making about that. It could be we need, to be careful about presupposition there.
Yeah,
and one thing, Kevin, you mentioned light on day 4. I mean, the sun lighting up on day 4, and there were days before then. There is a scientist, Barry Setterfield.
Yep. The speed of light guy.
Yeah.
I love that guy.
He's what?
I said I love that guy.
Oh yeah, BarrySetterfield.org is his website, and he has a scientific theory that explains actually, why there was light on day 1 before the sun lit up, and his theory actually predicts from the math that the sun would light up on day 4. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I haven't read that part of it. The thing that got my attention with him was how he talks about the speed of light not being a constant, and how it has been progressively slowing. It's been slowing down, and it's not been slowing down at a steady rate. It's been slowing down at the rate that could be measured by a cosecant squared curve. In other words, so if you go back in time, say to 1850, it would be a few trillionths of a second different. You probably wouldn't notice it at all. But if you go back to the time of Solomon, it would be 3,000 times faster, for example, something like that, to where a cosecant squared curve, it's like one of those things that it's at the end, it's kind of asymptotic, but as you go back toward the beginning, it shoots way up, almost like a hockey stick graph, but way higher than that. So back at the beginning of the creation, you would have the speed of light traveling almost instantaneously, and it's slowed down very rapidly for a while, and now it's slowing down very slowly, almost asymptotically. So it's so now we think it's a constant when it's not in fact a constant, which tells you why, even though you have atomic clocks that are measured by a cesium-133 atom, they do not stay in time. And not only Christians are onto this, but like Rupert Sheldrake and a few other people are questioning some of these constants.
Yep. Well, that's it. I guess I'm finished for now.
Well, you brought up a good point about I am the Lord thy God, I change not. Now, inductive method over here in Malachi chapter 3, verse 6. For I am the Lord thy God, I change not. Therefore, in other words, because I don't change, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. Now, what does this I change not mean? Does it mean that if you were to take, if you were, the point here is that God's not going to unchoose Jacob. He's not going to unchoose Israel because he's chosen them and that choice has been made. That's seems apparent in the context to me. And to stretch that out, I mean, Calvinists do the same thing with the concept of works. When it says salvation by grace through faith, not by works, the context is the works of the law. You don't have to be circumcised or keep the law of Moses in order to be saved. But Calvinists try to take that to an extreme where they remove any kind of interactive action whatsoever. So there is no belief, that's a work, all this stuff is works, and it takes it away from the context. What's the guy trying to say in the context where the passage appears? I don't think the person in Malachi 3:6 is trying to say that there is absolutely no variance. And some of y'all are thinking there is no variance or shadow of turning, but you're thinking of the song, How Great Thou Art, not a Bible verse. But it's not to say that there is absolutely no variance at all. I mean, what about when Jesus Christ showed up? Is he not God in the flesh? So how could he show up and Malachi 3:6 be true in an Augustinian sense? He showed up in time, and then he did things in time.
Yeah, and you know that chapter in Samuel, where Samuel.
It repented the Lord that he hath made man. Yeah, go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, there's one chapter in it, and I believe it says that God does not repent, but in the same chapter it says God did repent.
Exactly. Right.
So the context. Yeah.
Yep. So it's interesting. It's almost like the Bible is trying to get us to think. All right. Anybody else have any comments so far? I think we made it through like verse 6, comparing these things.
There's some comments in the chat.
Oh, there are. The Septuagint inserts Paul's quotation in Romans 3 into the Psalms. So I think the Septuagint postdates the writing of the New Testament. Yes, I would agree with that. I think the Septuagint came about sometime after 181 AD. What about monogenes as unique? So monogenes is the Greek word that gets translated as begotten, and mono, one, genes, origin of the only origin is basically what the word is as unique. So yeah, and then in Italian it's unigenito. I just say that to people who ridicule me for using the King James Bible. I switched to the Italian. See, I don't only use King James. And then we have this, oh yeah, Psalm 13:3 is enormous in the Septuagint. Yeah, the Sinaiticus. And Sinaiticus, not Septuagint. And Sinaiticus was found in like 1853 in a trash can at St. Catherine's Monastery, which is not even at the real Mount Sinai.
Well, that story is a lie, and everybody acknowledges it at this point, apparently.
Right. That was the official narrative, I think.
Yeah.
And I have this I'm not going to get into it, but I have this long write-up about why Sinaiticus is a forgery that I guess I should post one day, that one of my friends from Italy sent me.
I think technically it's not a forgery. It was created as a facsimile or a similitude. I forgot what it's called, but it was meant to look old, but the people who purchased it knew it wasn't.
That kind of sounds like a forgery.
But no, a forgery is they're trying to make everyone believe that it's authentic. I think the original commission of it was to make something that appeared old, but the people purchasing it knew this is not an original.
A fraud.
No, no, there's like a word for it. It's like if you purchase something that that's shabby chic, or something that's like meant to look farmhouse, from 150 years ago.
I don't know these words.
You gotta talk to your wife more, man.
Yeah, I learned soffit
Yeah,
from her.
it's like if somebody creates something that looks like an
Dormer.
antique, but they don't advertise it as that. It's like, look, it looks like it's from the 1850s. It's not. I produced it 3 days ago in my workshop, but it's meant to look old. That's the
Oh,
idea.
yeah. Like okay, yeah. I see what you're saying. So not
Yeah.
intending to deceive, but intending to decorate or something.
Yes.
I see.
Replica, but not.
It's like that, but it's not of a specific object. It's just of a general thing. And so the story I've heard from David Daniels, which I don't know, but is that essentially that's what it was. And since Tischendorf was obsessed with Vaticanus and wanted to do anything to take a look at it, he had to do something to get the Roman Catholics to let him see it. So that's why he had to find a document that would support Vaticanus for them to let him into the archive so we could look at Vaticanus.
That's interesting. Now we all had to learn that word. So you're saying the original version of it was just intending to be some kind of old looking thing.
Well, yeah, and part of that theory is because some of the documents of Sinaiticus, some of the folio are like pearly white. They look beautiful. They're absolutely perfectly preserved. And then other ones look yellowed. And there are other eyewitness accounts of people seeing the documents and saying they're white as the freshly driven snow. But then later, when they got them, they're not anymore, essentially. So the idea was they were intentionally aged.
So yeah, I just didn't want to put on a little show of moving around. This is an example of a King James Bible from 1611. And if you open it up, it has all that stuff in there that looks like this. So this is what the original one looked like that rolled off the presses in 1611, except it didn't say Zondervan on it. But this is a facsimile. It's made to look old, even though the real one was like this big. But you say it's something kind of like that, to where they're trying to make something that looks old, even though like nobody thinks this is the old from the 1600s, but it's trying to look like it.
Yeah, it's something to do with Simonides. It's very complicated with a lot of Greek names. I didn't track it all. And you don't need to. You could believe Sinaiticus is 100% authentic and still think it's garbage. And not trust it. So that's why you don't need to go down the conspiracy theory route, but it's an interesting idea and it does fit. Where they had created this, Tischendorf got a hold of it and he thought this is perfect. It follows the Vaticanus documentation, and so if I can present this as if it were this major archaeological whatever discovery, then the Catholic Church will let me in to see Vaticanus.
Okay, that's good information. So David W. Daniels, I think Jack Chick advertises for him a lot, or before he died, he did. Any other comments before we start looking at Hebrew stuff again? Yeah, Josh.
So yeah, we were talking about Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. We were talking about Hebrews 1:6, and that we couldn't find a direct quotation from the Old Testament. And Joe brought up the book of Enoch, and we talked about Enoch for a little bit. But it got me thinking I'd heard it somewhere, and I looked it up. Genesis 4 and Genesis 5 both have an Enoch in there, and they seem to be different on the surface. So were there two Enochs? Or am I missing? So. Am I missing context?
I think a couple of names are used several times.
So, like when we talk about the book of Enoch, is there any dispute about which Enoch we're talking about? Genesis 4:17 says, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch." Then Genesis 5:18 says, "And Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch."
So I think the book of Enoch is the Genesis 5 one. Because Enoch walked with God after he begot Methuselah 300 years and begot sons and daughters, and then he was not, for the Lord took him. Yeah, I think the Genesis 5 one is the one people are going with.
Okay.
Is what I think most people think that way. Which, by the way, if you want to look into the Enoch thing, the book Shocked by the Bible has a pretty interesting take on what happened to him. If you want to look into that. All right, let me close that out. Anybody got any comments before I'm gonna put this back up here? And I guess you can make comments anyway. Sharecate screenications. All right. So in Hebrews 1:6, we have that we already looked at. Hebrews 1:7 is pretty straightforward. Of the angels he saith, who maketh his angels spirits, and his minister is a flame of fire. And then we have the same thing over here, and that would be very interesting. So this is a comment about the angels, and then there's a comparison with the Son. But unto the Son is like, but look how much cooler the Son is. He saith, thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of thy kingdom. Now notice over here in Psalm 45, thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of righteousness, the scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter. So if you're reading in the Old Testament, you might not take that as being a reference to the Son of God. You might take that as a reference to being to God the Father or Jehovah. Over here, he says, unto the Son he saith. So if we are going to allow Hebrews to interpret Psalm 45:6, we would have the psalmist talking to pre-incarnate Christ here, is what you would have to do with that, which doesn't matter.
Hey, could I say something?
By all means.
Okay, I noticed there in Psalms, the next verse 7 says, God, thy God has anointed thee. But in verse 6, it says, it's talking about God. So God anointed God, and God has a God. So that sounds like at least two different members of the Godhead.
It's a really good point. I don't want to be irreverent, but there's a meme out there where it shows Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, hey, God, it's me, you. And I can take a little religious humor sometimes. But the atheists put that kind of thing out sometimes. Wherefore God, thy God, hath anointed thee with oil of gladness above thy fellows. And that's very interesting. Okay, so according to Hebrews, this is about the Son. And then who are his fellows? That's interesting. Who are the fellows of the Son? Thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore God, even thy God, hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. So who are his fellows? Would those fellows be other humans? Or would they be these, or is it a comparative term? And this writer of Hebrews thinks that they're about the angels. I don't know. Hebrews 1:10 through 12 seems to be a direct quotation from Psalm 102:25-27. So he says, but unto the Son he saith in Hebrews 1:8, and then he says, and. In other words, and he says this about the Son, skipping to Psalm 102. And thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest, and they all shall wax old as doth a garment, and as a vesture thou shalt fold them up, and they shall be changed, but thou art the same, all thy years shall not fail. And he says in Psalm 102, it says, of old thou hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture thou shalt change them, and they shall be changed, but thou art the same, and thy years shall have no end. Interestingly, I think Ruckman talks about this and depicts the universe as kind of like a garment for God to wear. Well, actually, Ruckman doesn't do that. This text does that. Depicts the universe as kind of like a garment, the earth and the heavens anyway. And so Ruckman has this thing where it's kind of like this this poncho thing, which is interesting if you ever get a hold of that. Hebrews 1:13.
Real quick, I actually have a question about Psalm 102.
Yeah.
It's something that's been bugging me for a long time. Is Jehovah the name of the Father or name of the Godhead? Or and, but That's a question I've been thinking about for a long time. And Psalm 102 seems to be, because if this is talking about the Son, and it's basically if verses 10 through 12 are talking about the Son, and it's quoting from Psalm 102, then Psalm 102 is talking about the Son, who is multiple times is all caps Lord. So Jehovah. I just wanted to get everybody's thoughts on that.
Where does it say all caps Lord?
In Psalm 102, verses 12,
Okay.
15, 16, 18, 19, 21, 22, and the actual quotation comes from 25 through 27, I think.
Right. And let me share that out so people can see that in Psalm. Okay. So whenever you see all caps Lord like this here, that is in the English Bible, that's a rendering of the Tetragrammaton, the Yad-He Vav-He. That is what we show up as Jehovah, or if you're an apostate, you pronounce it as Yahweh. But I'm just kidding, by the way. But that kind of thing. So, and then you see Lord, capital Lord, and that's one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses did in their Old Testament. Whenever it shows up like this, they actually write the word Jehovah in there, which, as far as Jehovah's Witnesses being a cult and all that, that's actually not an incorrect translation. And so pay attention in the Old Testament, whether it's Lord in all caps or not. If it's not in all caps, it's usually Adonai, which is just a term like sir or Mr. or like the Lord of the Manor kind of thing. Capital Lord is how the King James translator rendered Jehovah, because nobody knew how to pronounce Yad-He Vav-He, and so they didn't want to take a stab at it. So they're like, well, we will indicate where this shows up with these all caps word here. But okay, so of old thou hast laid the foundations of the earth, and the heaven the works of thy hands. So you're asking if the name Jehovah is a name of the Father or of the Godhead. And when you say Godhead, how much Michael Heiser is in that?
None, although I am fairly familiar with
You know
his
what I'm
work.
getting at?
Yeah. You're talking about the divine council, which is the generation. Actually,
Yeah.
in the King James, it's a different term, but it's more so. So the background, the context of this question goes to some Hebrew roots friends who are very upset that we call Jesus Lord, since apparently Lord in Hebrew means Baal, which is
So it's just a cognate.
It's just a
Yeah.
thing. It's not. But one of the things he points out was that it, like, the rabbinical Jews have like obscured the name of the Father, and so he's very obsessed about that. And I asked him once, and he said he was going to give me some research, but I haven't gotten it back in. I forgot to follow up. But I was curious if there was anywhere that seemed to like nail down that Jehovah can also refer directly to the Son, because if it refers to the Father in multiple places and the Son, then to me that says Godhead. It's a term for the Godhead, not a term. So if that were true, then with that understanding, if we're reading the Old Testament, we see Jehovah, that could be referring to the Godhead as, and I'm not using the word Trinity on purpose, the Godhead, and not specifically just the Father. And I'm bringing that up as a question. I don't know has anyone ever thought about that? But this verse seems to support it.
So when you ask that question, my heart starts to beat real fast because I have a lot of thoughts about it too, which I don't know if I'm ready to share. And okay, what does Jehovah mean?
Isn't it I am that I am from Exodus 4?
Right. And what's another way to say that?
I am.
Existing one.
Yeah, the self-existent one or something.
Existing one. And or some other ways of rendering it is that which exists. Well, what exists? I've been thinking about that for about a year and a half. About the I am that I am, or the existing one, as what Jehovah means. And that's been very thought-provoking for me.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
So to add
Please.
so-
Distract the attention.
Yeah, so well, this goes to Ben's question, but I think it's John 12:41, where they refer to Jesus high and lifted up, and yeah, which is the reference in Isaiah 6:1. Which is
let me do this to follow along. So you're over on the right hand side. I have John 12:41.
John 12:41, which is referring back to, I believe it's Isaiah 6:1.
6:1 and 2. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So in John 12:41, it says, "These things said Isaiah when he saw his glory and spake of him."
Mm-hmm. And that's referring back to the Old Testament in Isaiah 6:1, where it uses the term Jehovah.
So then in Isaiah 6:1, the year I saw also the Lord. Now I think that's Adonai.
That's
Adonai. There.
But in verse 3, the angels are crying out, "Holy, holy, holy!"
That is Jehovah.
Jehovah of hosts. Yeah.
Yes. Faux show. Seraphims, each 6 wings, twin.
Oh, that's interesting, Joe. Thank you.
So let's look at let's go look at John 12 now. Oh, I wrote some weird things in there. Actually, this is something I quote a lot when I'm leading into this is a quotation out of Isaiah 6:2 about blinding their eyes and hardening their heart. And all this stuff, you see this in Matthew 13 and Mark 4 and Luke 8 and John 12 and Acts 28, all leading up to Romans 9, being about the Jews every time. So that's one of the things I like to point out. So what I'm trying to do is back up a little bit. While you have light, believe on the light. But though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they believed not. The saying Isaiah the prophet may be fulfilled. Lord, who hath believed our report, to whom the Lord revealed? He hath blinded their eyes. Then these things said Isaiah when he saw his glory and spake of him. That's interesting. That's the writer of John saying this. And this his here. It's not Jesus saying that, it's the writer of John explaining for us, for the reader.
Talking about Jesus.
Yeah. When he saw his glory. So that his there, the antecedent of his, it would be whether or not that is in fact a reference to Jesus Christ. Or whether it's a reference to the Lord.
I think it's a reference. Go back to John 12:34. The people answered him, "We have heard out of the law that Christ abideth forever, and how sayest thou the Son of Man must be lifted up?" So in this one, it seems to equivocate the Son of Man and Christ. Right. And then two verses earlier, Jesus himself said, "And if I be lifted up from the earth." So it seems like Jesus equals Christ equals Son of Man, down to verse 41 equals the one whose glory was seen by Isaiah.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right. That has a ring of truth to me for sure.
Yeah, Walter Martin used that a lot when combating Jehovah's Witnesses in the Kingdom of the Cults.
Yeah, I got that book right behind me too.
Yeah.
So I'll keep looking around like that matters. No, that's really good. Any other comments from anybody on that or on anything else? Roberta or Robert? We have a Robert. Yeah. So Lord can also be Yah, which appears in Isaiah as Lord Jehovah. And also it shows up in the book of Psalms as Jah or Yah. And every time you see a Yah in front of somebody's name, like Jeconiah, Joshua, Jehoshaphat, Jah, that Yah part is a reference to Jehovah And they're putting it in their name. Jehovah is something is usually what that means. All right, so we were in verse 13. I'm going to go back to my little chart here. But unto which the angel said he at any time, sit on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. This is a quotation straight from Psalm 110. And this seems to be a stage setter, because the rest of the book of Hebrews is going to keep coming back to Psalm 110, especially when it starts hitting on Melchizedek, because Melchizedek is hit on in Psalm 110. Now, what's interesting to me, speaking of what Paul mentioned at the beginning of this session and some of the things that Joe and Ben were just talking about, it says the Lord, Matthew 22:44. That'd be interesting what that word is there in Matthew 22:44, because it's all caps, Lord. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. Now that's worth looking at, because I want to show you how even the apostate Jews considered that passage, Psalm 110, to be about the Christ. Not that they agreed on who the Christ was, but they did at least agree that wasn't the controversial part of the question. What is that, Matthew 22:44?
It's Kyrios both times, but I bet they capitalized it because in the Hebrew it's probably
Yep, that is
Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh.
Kyrios. Yeah. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand. So here's the deal. I'm not even sharing that. I'm sorry. I'm not sharing my screen. Somebody got to tell me that. I'm sharing the wrong screen. I went over to the Bible software, but did not include you guys. It makes me feel bad. He said unto them, what think ye of Christ? Matthew 22:42. What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? And they said unto him, the son of David. Then he saith, how then doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David could then call him Lord, how is he his son? And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask any more questions. And it seems like what I take from that is that the fact that Jesus connects that, like Psalm 110 verse 1, this is obviously talking about the Christ, that does not seem to be controversial. Nobody refutes that. Nobody comes and says, well, what makes you think that passage is about the Christ? It's like it was like common knowledge that that's about the Christ, which I would be curious if Jews today, they don't think Jesus of Nazareth is Christ, but I wonder if they think that Psalm 110 verse 1 is about the Christ. Because apparently Jesus' audience here did, and they did not have a problem with saying Psalm 110 1 was about Christ, the Mashiach, the anointed one. Y'all follow my logic on that? Am I losing anybody? No? Somebody's shaking their head. Anyway, it's interesting to me that people in Jesus' time, I mean, they probably didn't think he was Christ, but they had no problem with that verse being presumed to be about Christ. So that also shows up in Acts 2:34 through 35, where Peter Cations is talking, and he says, and he makes this about Jesus Christ. And then he says in Hebrews 1:14, are they not all ministering spirits? But unto which of the angels said, verse 13, unto which of the angels said he any time, are they not all ministering spirits? And I think that is the they is a reference to the angels. And these are rhetorical questions. Like, I'm going to ask this of the angels, unto which of the angels said he this? And it's a rhetorical question with the obvious answer being none of them. Why? Because the Son of God is so much better than them. That is only stated about the Son of God. Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be the heirs of salvation? So these angels are ministering spirits. I think that he's making the point, another rhetorical question. Aren't they? Aren't these angels all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be the heirs of salvation? And it seems to be a like he's wrapping things up here. If all these angels were ministering to people who shall be the heirs of salvation, and you're supposed to listen to them, how much more should we listen to the Son and take heed to what he says, lest we should let these things slip? So I have this Psalm 103 over here, but I was using a cross-reference tool, the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, and it basically gives you cross-references to passages that are similar, but that doesn't mean that it is necessarily what they were quoting. So I don't think he was quoting anything here in Hebrews 1:14. Maybe somebody else does, though. And then you get right into chapter 2. In chapter 2, Hebrews 2, he says, therefore we ought to give the more earnest heed. If these angels were ministering spirits who shall be the heirs of salvation, and if you're interested in salvation, and the guy through whom God is speaking lately is better than the angels, man, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard from the Son, lest at any time we should let them slip. And then he even explains that. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience receive a just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by them that heard him, God also bearing them witness with signs and wonders? So he goes on to legitimize what the Son, what God has said through the Son, still comparing him to these angels in a favorable fashion, favorably compared to these angels. So we need to pay attention. The image that I have in my head is a bunch of Jews who are, maybe they think Jesus is the Messiah, and maybe they don't. Maybe they're on the fence about it. But the writer of Hebrews is, you got these Jews, they're kind of complacent, it seems to me. Like they're going to synagogue, they're continuing to be a Jew. Just like a Jew, they have entered a time of kairos and they're not doing anything about it. They're just letting it go. They're letting it come and go. Okay. And the writer of Hebrews is trying to shake them out of their slumber and say, no, you cannot just let this go. We have to give heed to this and do something about it, because this time is going to come and go. And then, like, kind of like going to the promised land the first time, like, hey, when Joshua and Caleb come back with that positive report, we need to jump on that, because we're not going to get another opportunity. It's going to come and go. Better not let it slip. Anyway, I'll stop talking. And we've hit Hebrews chapter 1. We're going to go into chapter 2 next time. I think we lost Paul and Elizabeth for a second, and they are back. Y'all came back. You found us.
Sorry, our power just gave out.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, we just revealed the answer.
Oh, it's all about timing in life, right? We were looking for the answer. We weren't certain.
It's 42. That's the answer. That's easy.
That's right.
Oh, 42.
The issue is, what's the question? Yeah.
Yeah.
The meaning of life. That's hilarious. So next, what we're going to do, we're going to keep going through chapter 2. Now, this session was a little bit weird because it's very interesting because of how the Old Testament passages are employed by the New Testament writer. Very interesting. But it's just basically, in the context of Hebrews, it's basically a list of quotations to bolster one point over and over, and it's that the Son is worth listening to. He's better than the angels. You're going to listen to angels, you better listen to the Son. And he gives all these quotations from the Old Testament basically to bolster that point and drive it home, which proves that whoever was writing this was a Baptist. Just kidding. And then I don't think there's going to be quite as much of that as we move forward. And so I think it's going to be a little more fluid. That having to deal with all those quotes kind of made this session a little rigid, I guess, because of that. But it's going to be a little more into getting a better central idea of the text as we're going forward. So as we go through chapter 2, what we want to do again is continue to separate things into paragraphs, like on your own at home. Go through chapter 2, go through chapter 3, separate these chapters into paragraphs, and then try to figure out what the central idea of the text is for each paragraph. So when we come back together next week, what I kind of want to do at the end of this, especially like maybe we'll pause when we get up to chapter 6, but what I want to do when we get to chapter 6 is I'm going to put all the central ideas of the text back to back and read them like they are a paragraph and see if it makes sense. See if it flows into chapter 6 and into the central ideas that we get out of chapter 6. See if they flow with that. And we're going to check them. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what I want to do. So chapter 2, chapter 3, and as far as you can get. And what we want to do is narrow down the central ideas of the texts, and then we're going to compare them all as we go. And then we can also be looking at some of the meaning as we go too, to be more in depth. But I'm out of juice as far as tonight's session is concerned. And definitely want, if you guys have anything to share, anything you came across while you were going through chapter 1, or anything that you want to point out for us as we're getting to chapter 2 that you noticed, any comments from anybody, by all means, give me a reason to stop talking.
Hey, Kevin, you mentioned grammar last time for chapter 2.
Uh-huh.
Are we going to go through that next week?
Yeah.
Okay. We just had a special session with Paul and Liz's son, who's a grammar expert. So I don't want to forget it all.
Are they coming to join us?
Yeah, your son coming on, Paul? Liz? And then, one quick question too. You mentioned Jesus' birth as one of the possibilities for verse 5. And then somewhere I read, next was his second coming, verse 8, I think it was, then his reign, and his ascension, reign, second coming down below. Is that reading into it? Because I would never have picked that up if I hadn't read it somewhere.
Where did you read that? What did you read again?
I think verse 8-ish is referring to it's almost a progression. Jesus' birth, as you mentioned, in verse 5, I think it was. And then it talked about verse, I think it was 8-ish, his second coming. And then his reign down lower, maybe in 10-ish, 10, 11, I don't know. And then I have a note here about ascension, reign, second coming again, down lower again, at the end of the chapter. Maybe 13. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of see that pattern, I guess. It kind of sounds a little left hemisphere to me. But speaking of that, I have a question. Adrian wanted me to ask. How many people are left-handed here? 1, 2, 3, 4. Only 4 of us.
Technically, everyone's left-handed, but everyone's born right-handed, technically, but only the greatest can overcome it.
It's such a left-handed person thing to say.
We're the only people in our right minds.
That's right.
I would have been, but I was switched.
What?
I would have been left-handed, but I was switched. My parents didn't let me stay left-handed.
So I guess it's curious to me because, yeah, that gets to happen to a lot of people. They allowed me to stay left-handed, but they say the left side of your body is connected to the right side of your brain, and the right hemisphere of your brain is more freshly attentive, and the left hemisphere of your brain is better at mapping things to what it already knows, right? And so it's curious to me what the spectrum here would be. Since we're in explore mode, we're trying to observe and we're trying to be attentive, and we're trying as much as we can not to map the text to things that we already know. It's just curious to me what the spread of people would be, who that appeals to. You know, just as a point of curiosity. It's not a scientific experiment. But yeah, we're going to be going through the grammar. So you were talking about this going as a progression to the Son, and then working its way through the resurrection, and then to the reigning. And that had to do with, what was the comment? What was the original comment you started that comment on?
Well, because you mentioned Jesus' birth in verse
Oh yeah.
5, and that's what, and I had that note here as well, and then the other comments below that.
Okay, yeah.
It doesn't matter. I was just curious if there was.
Well, yeah, it's interesting to notice that pattern.
Yeah, I didn't notice it though. Someone else did.
So you have, I'm looking at the text here, verse 6. Let me look at it. I got my spreadsheet out. I got my document open, and it's taking a long time to scroll past all those Old Testament quotations. You got the first begotten into the world. Then you got
second coming is a note I had.
the scepter of the kingdom. That had to be the beginning, the second coming as the beginning.
Yeah.
And then being anointed with the oil of gladness above thy fellows would be like being chosen as king, I guess. And thou hast laid the foundation of the heavens, earth, works thy hands. They shall perish, but they remaineth, like the new heavens and the new earth. So like a little progression there. I did not notice that in the text. And that is interesting. And it makes me wonder if that is intentional. But yeah, that's interesting. That's a good observation. Anyone else have any comments to share? Anything anybody found in chapter 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 that you want to warn the rest of us about? Or call to our attention? I don't hear. Roberta, are you saying something? Because I can't hear you.
There. This is pretty far off topic, but I had mentioned last week how hard Hebrews was for me. And I think over my lifetime, I might have heard a handful of sermons on it. And it was generally around the faith chapter, Hebrews 11. I haven't heard a lot of sermons, if any, anywhere else in Hebrews. But you had asked us to read through this several times if we could. And I tried to do that. The thing that came to the surface for me reading the entire book was a surprise that it all about Jesus, which if you had asked me, I never would have said that it seemed that it was all about Jesus. And it's an entire book really of relative and comparisons. And I just, if you'll bear with me a minute, I just jotted down what I caught through there. Better than angels, better thing, less is blessed of the better hope, better testament, more excellent ministry, greater, more perfect tabernacle, more excellent sacrifice, better country, better thing, good thing established with grace, more excellent name, lower than the angels, worthy of more glory, made perfect, swear by no greater, higher than the heavens, from least to the greatest, and how much more. And it's all about Jesus. And I was so shocked to read that it's just saying how much better he is than all of this. And a couple of those don't deal with him, but I was just real surprised at what it talked about and the comparisons through there, because I never would have ever come up with that if somebody would have asked me that without reading it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, that's excellent.
But I still don't understand chapter 6, and I'm really befuddled about rest. So I'm anxious to get into God's rest and all of that, because I still am not real sure I understand what he's talking about. But I was kind of surprised about the comparisons.
I like that. Did you happen to write any of that down as notes or anything?
Yeah, yes, because I could never have remembered that if I didn't.
So I'm wondering if we can start a repository. Joe, I'm talking to you. I wonder if we could start a repository on Joe's website where we can kind of capture some of everybody's notes and stuff, because that kind of thing would be really good. I know this goes against what I opened with. But yeah, that's a really good point. I want to throw
It can be
something.
done.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, to just capture everybody's observations, because I think the observations are gold.
I've noticed one thing about Zoom. In the chat box, I see 3 dots, and I can save the chat.
Oh.
Uh,
Oh. To where though?
Well, on my computer, it goes into, I think it's my documents or my downloads folder. Under that, there's a Zoom folder, and it goes in there.
Okay. I
That's
just
pretty
saved it, but
cool.
it'll be
I didn't even
interesting
notice
to
that.
see where it shows up. Huh. I have been copying and pasting, so if I can find that now, that'd be great.
I want to point something out, something I'm thinking about, to think about as you go through this. Let me stop sharing a second so I can just talk to you and look at you for a second. What if I asked you to do something? What if I asked you to go take a test, and when you were finished with the test, I said you failed? What would you presume that you had failed? Probably presume you had failed the test. What if you also happened to fail at something else? What if you failed to keep your shoe on or something, and your shoe came untied, and that you came out of taking a test and I said you failed? Would you think that I was talking about your shoe? You probably would not, right? Why am I saying this? When the Bible talks about sin sometimes, I think we tend to think that it is an overarching phrase that encompasses all infractions, and sometimes it is. But I also think that sometimes it will list a specific thing not to do, and then that is the sin that it's talking about. Y'all follow me on that concept?
Mm-hmm.
Not that you agree with me. So, for example, I want you to pay attention to this, because since Roberta mentioned chapter 6, this popped into my head to remind, because the same thing comes up in John 3 too. So if he says, therefore, we need to give them more earnest heed, lest we should let them slip, what would be the sin here? It would be to not give earnest heed and to let them slip, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would think. That's kind of where I'm going with this, all right? How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? What's the sin? To neglect so great a salvation. Let's go to chapter 3, verse 6. Christ is a son over his own house. Whose house are we if we hold fast our confidence or rejoicing firm unto the end? What would be the sin there? To not hold fast the confidence and rejoicing firm unto the end. That would be the sin there. What would be the sin in verse 14? Something very similar. If we hold fast the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. To not do that would be a sin. And what am I saying? What am I saying? When we get to Hebrews chapter 10, verse like 28 or 26, really. Go to 25. This very famous passage, it's used to promote church attendance, right? Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as a manner of some is, or exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. If we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. A lot of people read that, and what goes through their mind is any kind of infraction. Like if you sin is transgression of the law, and if you break the law at any one point, you're guilty of all. And so if I happen to see an attractive person of the opposite gender and I have a wrong thought, then there's no more sacrifice for sin. I don't think that's what he's getting at here. I think that what he's getting at is, if we sin willfully after we've received the knowledge of the truth, is specifically the things in the book that he's warning the people to do and to not do. Specifically those things. That's what I think. That's what I'm leaning toward. And if I can frame it for you, that's what I would ask you to consider as you keep reading. Maybe I'm wrong, but as you're reading through and as you're getting through chapter 6 and things like that, if you think about specifically the things that he is trying to prompt this audience to do, think about that, not your general concept of everything you think sin is, or the thing that you're falling away from, because that was one of our observation questions in chapter 6, falling away from what? And so pay attention to specifically what he's asking them to do in Hebrews leading up to chapter 6. So when he says fall away, maybe it's these specific things that he's admonishing them to do. Fall away from that. And then like Roberta kind of did a second ago, make a list of what are those things? What are those things he's asking us to do, or asking the audience to do in this book? Make a list of those things. That might be something to kind of have on your radar screen to be looking for. All right, we're at the end of our time here. Does anybody have any comments before we start to close down? I haven't heard from some of you tonight. I'm disappointed. Any other comments before we close out? I guess we'll wrap it up. So next week we're going to pick up in chapter 2, and we'll start going through paragraph by paragraph. What are our central ideas of the text, and do the grammar thing at the house, and then we'll come together and compare, and we'll try to pick up the pace on this and start moving through the book a little faster with these central ideas of the text.
Oh, Kevin.
Yep.
Real quick, I just thought of something. For people to use the website to post comments or notes, I can create accounts for people, but it requires an email address. So maybe they could email you and you could forward it to me.
Yep. Just like I did with Ben earlier.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So Joe has put together a website where he's collecting information on there. I think you could put a discussion forum, a file repository, stuff like that. And so if y'all are wanting to check that out, shoot me an email and I'll get you in touch with Joe so he can create you an account. Anybody else? All right, guys. I appreciate everybody coming in tonight. I'm looking forward to next week. We'll start on chapter 2.
Thanks, Kevin.
Ease out.
Thank you. Bye.
Everybody.
Ease out.
All right. Have a good week.